Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be here. I want to just, we're going to do a couple of housekeeping things, make sure our panelists, Daniel, Kirsten, Laura, and Mark, all are ready to go. They got their audio working, their videos working. So we're going to just do a couple of quick housekeeping items just to make sure we're good. There's Mark. Fantastic. Good to see you, sir. Oh, Mark, I think you're muted.
All right. Good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
likewise. There we go. Um, Daniel, can you hear us loud and clear?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Fantastic.
Good to see you.
Laura?
Yep, we're all set. Thank you.
Good deal. And Kirsten, it's always good to see you.
Always good to see you too. I'm a little worried about my network connection here. It's kind of fuzzy on my end. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
That's what matters. Thank you.
So good deal. All right. So well, let's get things kick started. I want to welcome the attendees who are joining us with this prestigious group. This group is a fantastic panel of cybersecurity policy experts who are in the weeds day in and day out, just trying to create a better society as it relates to cybersecurity. I always, jump on my soapbox and say every student should be cyber literate. And these individuals that are on this panel today are actually doing that. They are actually the ones from the policy standpoint, from the practitioner standpoint, that are actually doing some incredible work to foster the next generation cyber literate workforce. So I want to, as before I go around the room to do some quick introductions, I just want to thank them. I know their time is precious for being here. So as just by way of real quick introductions, I won't go into it because I'll need a 2-hour webinar just to read everyone's bio, because that's just how impressive these folks are. But we have Daniel Bleberg, who is the legislative assistant for Senator Jacky Rosen, the great senator from Nevada. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us. We've got one of my colleagues, Brad Morris, who is the deputy director for the Cyber Innovation Center. He's actually going to be co-hosting this webinar with us today. We've got Mark Montgomery with us, who is the executive director at the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And then one of his colleagues, Laura Bate, who is a senior director at the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And then last, but absolutely not least, one of my good friends in the education space, Superintendent Kirsten Baszler, who is the state superintendent for the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. So again, I echo this prestigious group. We're going to dive into some of the hard questions around cybersecurity education and the state and federal policies that encompass it. But we also have a special guest who's going to be kicking things off for us today. Senator Jacky Rosen, who is the state senator from Nevada, has served in the U.S. Senate of Nevada since 2019. And previously, she was the U.S. representative for Nevada's 3rd Congressional District, as well as the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, where she passed legislation to improve early childhood STEM education. So her passion is there, and we have Senator Rosen with us to offer some opening remarks. So Senator Rosen, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Senator Jacky Rosen, and I'm proud to represent the great state of Nevada in the United States Senate. Right now, our country faces a shortage in our cyber workforce. This shortage creates challenges that weaken our economic and national security. The United States is expected to face a shortage of 3.4 million skilled technical workers by 2022, and a recent study found that less than half of K-12 students are getting any cyber-related education. At the same time, there's been a sharp increase in the number of reported cyber attacks around the country, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're facing cyber attacks ranging from data breaches to ransomware attacks at the local, national, and global level. It's clear that cyber vulnerabilities are a growing national security threat. Ensuring that the United States remains a leader in technology, security, and economic competitiveness, and that critical cybersecurity workforce shortages are addressed, are essential to our national security. It's critical that we meet the cyber challenges we face with bold ideas. To address this workforce shortage, we need innovative solutions and a better cyber education. That's why earlier this year, I introduced the PROTECT Act, a bipartisan bill to authorize and strengthen the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Education Training Assistance Program, or CTAP. This legislation would provide stability to CTAP, which provides direct, no-cost support for our nation's K-12 teachers and students to prepare an engaged cyber-literate workforce. I'm proud to share with you that the PROTECT Act was incorporated into the Senate's Defense Authorization Bill, and I'm working with my colleagues to ensure that it will be included in the final defense bill. As an implementing partner for CTAP, I commend cyber.org for the critical role the organization plays in reaching K-12 students and teachers across the country with cybersecurity education content, career awareness, and teacher professional development. In addition to introducing the PROTECT Act, I also introduced the bipartisan Cyber Ready Workforce Act, which would create a grant program that provides students with more opportunities to participate in registered apprenticeship programs in cybersecurity. Through this legislation, we can fill the gaps in our cyber defense and meet the demands of our growing cyber workforce. I am proud to be your ally in Congress, and with your partnership, we will continue to fight for innovative policies that expand and protect cyber jobs here in Nevada and across the country. Thank you and enjoy your event.
All right. Senator Rosen, thank you so much. We very much appreciate you spearheading these important policies there within Congress and Washington, D.C., amongst our partners there. So very much appreciate you. Now we'll turn over to Senator Rosen's legislative assistant, Daniel. Again, Daniel, also shout out to you. We know you've worked very hard on all of this and advising Senator Rosen. So thankful for you. So we'll kind of start off the first question with you. We just heard your boss, Senator Rosen, talk a little bit about how cybersecurity challenges are pivotal, going forward. So if you don't mind kind of elaborating a little bit on that and explain how cybersecurity challenges weaken our economy and our national security specifically.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to participate on this panel. And as you just heard from Senator Rosen, promoting opportunities in cybersecurity and STEM education is something that's deeply personal to the senator. As some of you might not know, actually, before she came to Congress, she worked as a computer programmer and systems analyst. And she saw firsthand some of the difficulties that come with challenging gender stereotypes in STEM. And so in addition to her passion in STEM education, she's also very committed to ensuring that women, particularly young women, are given opportunities to get involved in STEM, in cybersecurity, and to break down some of those gender barriers. So she knows firsthand the importance of quality STEM education. And looking across nationally, the statistics are staggering when it comes to our cybersecurity workforce shortage. Obviously it's one of the most in-demand industries, but we're facing a critical workforce shortage. And specifically in Nevada, there are some pretty alarming statistics. The fact that only about 65% of all public high schools teach computer science, and only 877 exams were taken in AP computer science by high school students in 2018. And of those students, only a third were female, and an even smaller proportion of exams were taken by Hispanic, Black, and AAPI students. And so, when you look at that and then you magnify that across the country, that's a threat to our national security. And so in order to overcome this gap and prepare our nation for the economy of the future, we have to invest in cybersecurity education and workforce development. And the bottom line is that investing in cyber workforce is a win for education. It's a win-win for developing a 21st century workforce, and it's important for our national security.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Daniel, and I appreciate that. And in keeping in the theme of kind of the national perspective, Laura, I kind of want to turn to you for the next question. The third white paper of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission focused on a growing federal cyber workforce that included a number of policy recommendations to address the shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals. Can you talk about a little bit kind of from your perspective about those recommendations that you're trying to put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Instead of talking through specific recommendations, though, because I can talk your ear off all day and I want to hear from everybody else as well, I'll talk a little bit about sort of the big picture that those recommendations are built around. Really what we were focusing on is creating a strategy for that workforce development and leadership to carry it out. We see a lot of different initiatives, a lot of different efforts that are springing up across the federal government, but really that could use more coordination and figuring out how we use all of these different elements most effectively, stop duplicating work that's already been done, and identify holes in which there are opportunities to move forward. So to give some examples of that coordination, a lot of structures are in place to allow for greater pay flexibility, greater hiring, but they're not always available. They tend to be sort of built on this rickety system of how we code different structures and different jobs, and that's not always applicable across USG. So we're thinking about ways you can make that sort of more coordinated across the government. We're also thinking about figuring out how we identify, how we match actors who can take something forward with the resources to allow it to happen. So for example, one of our recommendations looked at a clearinghouse for K-12 cybersecurity resources. You all have curricula down pat, but there are a range of other things that we could really be looking at. And so if the mandate for that is split across different parts of government, that is far less effective than if we have it consolidated. We know who's running with it and we know how to take that forward. As I say all that, a lot of our recommendations really focused on the federal government. However, as we were writing it, we were also thinking that the federal government can't just, and you may have heard Representative Langevin, one of our commissioners, say this as well, the federal government can't just focus on cutting ourselves a larger slice of the pie of talent workforce. We have to figure out how we grow the whole pie and our slice along with it. And so a number of the recommendations in there also speak to education. They speak to how we bring more people in general across the country into the field.
Absolutely. No, and Laura, that's a very good point. And kind of going a little bit further in that too, going back to a point that Daniel had made earlier. So the white paper points to diversity, equity, and inclusion as a critical step in improving the national cyber workforce. What are some steps that state and federal policymakers can take to support diversity in the cyber workforce?
So I would say there are two different paths that we can do, and it's not either or, it's both at once. Sure. But one path is figuring out, just generally speaking, how do we create new pathways into the workforce? Right now, largely, we're hiring from four-year graduates from computer science programs, similar things. And that is not going to be your most demographically diverse talent pool imaginable. Thinking about how we can pull in people who are coming from associate's degree programs, people who are coming from different backgrounds, who have experience as network engineers, but maybe not that four-year degree, people who are interested and have aptitude, but maybe have their degree in psychology. How do we build pathways that bring this whole breadth of people into the field? And with that, you bring a lot more diverse sets of not just interests, but people and educational backgrounds and professional backgrounds. So we're thinking about things like apprenticeship programs, exchange programs, things that really allow us to tap into and create new pathways to bring people on. Also thinking about hiring structures that allow for and reward that. So if you look at the way the federal government currently does hiring and pay, if you come in with an associate's degree, that's not going to get you nearly as high on the pay scale as if you come in with a bachelor's. But right now, that it may not be the case that a job needs those two things in equal measure. So figuring out how to reward the skills that we really do critically need becomes very important. Looking more specifically at not just how do we bring more people in and diversity with it, we also need to think about where are there underrepresented groups and how do we bring those groups specifically in. And I know one of the challenges that I as a researcher run up against quite frequently is that we don't have very good data on this. So you look, for example, at the percentage of women that are in the workforce. You can hear everything between about 11% and 24%, and it depends on who you ask. And none of those surveys have very large sample sizes, and it just gets messy fast. And so how are we going to say that we're improving participation of women in the workforce if we can't even really definitively say from year to year how many women are in the workforce? Same goes with ethnic minorities and people of color. We're pretty sure that they're represented in junior and earlier positions in the cybersecurity workforce, more or less equivalently with how they are in other bodies of work across the United States. But that decreases as you get further into the workforce. As you get more and more senior, you start to see significant drop off. We don't really have any data on why that is. So being able to answer some of these fundamental questions becomes really, really important. Once we have that, we can be establishing clear career pathways with concrete criteria for promotions, manager awareness and support. We can build structures around figuring out how we do that right, how we recruit and retain people effectively.
Absolutely. No, Laura, that's a good point. And I appreciate you highlighting the benefit of the apprenticeships. Something recently, I think what we've seen from the federal government side and our partners on that side is given a greater emphasis on improving that, giving that hands-on approach. So that way people can get involved and really learn from that. So no, I think that's a great point. I'm sure something Daniel could probably elaborate too on his work on that. But moving on to Mark. Mark, you were part of the original group that created the Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service programs. Are there any key learnings from that program that you think could support the development of K-12 cyber education?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. And you're right. 21 years ago, this January, we rolled out Scholarship for Service it was a product we produced after Presidential Decision Directive 63 on critical infrastructure. And I think it's a good program. I still do. It's an ROTC-like program. That's how we described it. I was an ROTC graduate. I was a military officer at the time on the National Security Council. And we were trying to create an ROTC-like program. And I think in our first year, we put it at 5 universities, 9 students. It's now at 82 universities, 300 students. The problem is, and what we can learn from that, is that our goal was 300 students in 5 years. And we reached 300 students in 21 years. So we're very slow on the growth. And one of the reasons was that we didn't get it into law early. So, we didn't have an authorization that would be easy to appropriate against it. That took a number of years, and it really took the movement. It went from, Department of Commerce and NSF to NSF and DHS, and NSA was involved with it for a while. And finally, it's kind of settled being administered by NSF with OPM assistance, or OPM with NSF assistance, and with DHS also providing advice. The problem is it has a whole lot of cooks and not enough people authorized in law initially. So if we're going to grow a K through 12 program, I would make sure it's authorized. So that's why I think the CTAP bill, and I'll go one step farther than the senator, and I'll say that Senator Rosen, I'll say that I think it's going to be in the final NDAA. We've been tracking it closely in the House, but I'll also say I don't know that there'll be an NDAA. So you gotta take everything with a grain of salt. We have like 25 Cyberspace Layer Commission recommendations rolling in the NDAA. We could end up with 25, and we can end up with 0. I don't think it'll be either of those numbers, but that it is a dice roll. But back on this, it's funny in the chapter below. So we put out something called the National Report for Information Systems Protection, and this was in 2001, and it was it also had in it a high school education effort, but again, we didn't get it into law at all. We gave it to the Department of Education. For all I know, it still exists under the name it had back then, but it hasn't produced the product we need. And so, from my point of view, the number one thing is put it in legislation. The number two thing is you absolutely have to get Senate and House champions. You have to get people who every year come back, and it can't be based on it's being funded out of something out of my district. I mean, that was the beauty of Cyber Corps being out in 82. No one senator was getting a great, or congressman was getting a great deal, because there's 8 to 10 students at any one college. That's not enough to move the marker. It's got to be good governance moving it, because you can't afford to have a senator or congressman get on or off appropriations and suddenly your support goes away. It has to be this broad-based support of people who care about cybersecurity. So Senator Rosen is a great example of someone who just cares. I mean, her state isn't preferentially serviced by these programs. She just supports it because it's the right thing to do. And Senator Perdue is another senator in the same category who's been supporting these kind of initiatives without, it being any big, specific thing in Georgia. So I think there's a number of senators and congressmen. Jim Langevin another one. There isn't actually a Rhode Island school in the program, but he's a big supporter of it. So, you can see that in case after case. So you need that kind of legislative support. And then the other thing we have to do is we have to do much better public advertising. I mean, one of the problems we do is we put just enough money in for the scholarships or whatever program there is, and we don't put in the kind of recruitment and advertising you need to hit it just right. So legislate it, get the champions, and then advertise it properly. If you do those three things, I think you'll be set for success. Now, and I think, when we think about about the K through 12 education program, we're kind of getting there. We're two out of three probably, and then a webinar like this is part of that discussion of the product as it goes forward. That would be my recommendations on how to leverage scholarship for service.
Absolutely. No, I thank you for that. All very extremely important points. And keeping kind of along those lines, the CSC report emphasized the need for some research in order to baseline and measure success of cyber workforce development efforts. So one of the key questions was around the correlation between K through 12 cybersecurity education or career awareness efforts and increased long-term professional or academic interest in security. Do you mind talking a little bit about why that research has been so hard to do as of today?
Well, listen, first I'd say across the board, we've got to do a better job of understanding who's in the cyber workforce, how these people gain the knowledge and the skills they have that we value, how they got into the workforce, what makes them successful in their jobs. The cybersecurity community is really just doing this on anecdotal evidence, vice the kind of quality research data you need. We've got to figure out, we need this research so we can figure out what policies and programs to go. Like, I'm confident Scholarship for Service is a good program. I wish I had a good set of interviews with people that said, you gotta account for the specific experiences they had, but did they think Scholarship Service was a good program to bring them in? Would they have entered the government otherwise without the scholarship? I think the answer is going to be yes, it's good, and no, I wouldn't have entered without it. So, but that's anecdotal. I need to understand that, have that kind of data, we got to figure out, there's programs out there. Like my daughter's doing a cybersecurity badge and journey in Girl Scouts right now. There's there's programs like that. Is that good? I don't know. How many kids does that affect? In my community in Arlington, I know there's not that many girls in Girl Scouts, total. So maybe it's affecting 10 or 12 young girls in a total of the 4 high schools. So that's not but that's anecdotal. We really need to get an understanding for this. And then, once they get a little older, what causes them to say, I'm going to go into cybersecurity. I'm going to stay in this community. I'm going to build the skills I need. And so really you're asking, why is this research hard? Because it's obvious that it's needed. Well, the first reason it's hard is you need large sample sizes. And that's just not something we have good access to on the adult side, and even less on the K through 12. And it takes a long time to get this data. And if there's one thing we know Congress and the executive branch don't have, it's patience. You know what I mean? And you really need to dig into this and say, I'm going to study this for a year, get it right, and come back to you. This would be a hard thing. GAO, if you tried to assign it to them, they'd be like, why are you giving this to us? I mean, surely somebody else besides the government accounting office could study this. And my answer might be, yeah, but they're not. But we got to think about how we do that. And it takes time to get data, right? You can't go on 1 year's data. Like if you were to collect data this year about cybersecurity, it might be much different than the data 3 years ago or 3 years in the future. So you really have to look at it, over time. And then, and then finally, you got to say, is this research, what are the incentives to drive this kind of research? I'll tell you one last thing. There's a tiny bit of perception in this too. So, I mentioned the Scout program. There's some great summer camps out there. There's other things, but they're very small. These are slices of things. I don't know. We have to be careful to say problem solved, because the Boy Scouts have a badge and the Girl Scouts have a journey. Winner on both of them. Absolutely not the final answer in either case. So we've got to figure this out. And so we're pushing hard, and we did a better job in the white paper. Laura was our lead author. She really hammered home this issue. A much better job in our white paper than we did the initial report on saying, you have to have quality research data to press this. Now, look, I don't think that that's going to affect whether we should have more scholarship for service programs, or we don't know that we need more funding for CTAP. Things that are already working, I continue to put money into under the reasonable perception that, you know, it's good money chasing good money.
Yep.
But to understand how we're going to solve the whole problem, we need more research data, and we got to get at it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, Mark, that I'll add was the cyber.org curriculum team was heavily involved in driving the Girl Scout badges. And I actually got an email 2 days ago that 250,000 badges were earned across the country in cybersecurity. So again, it's anecdotal. It's something small, but it's a tremendous step in the right direction. And I totally, can respect the fact that we've got to look at this from a research perspective, and we have to look at this from a holistic perspective, and start all swimming in the same lane as it relates to ensuring that the efforts that are out there are all synergized towards an outcome that is an expanded cyber workforce. And so,
hey, I'll give you one more thing. So I was getting a brief on the amount of K through 12 education we're providing to teachers. And, I'm not a senator or congressman, but I think I've learned to try to think like them as a staffer and then running this commission. I'm getting this brief, and boy, the numerator was so high, so many teachers. I'm like, I was excited. And then somebody in my team leans over and says, hey, ask what the denominator of total high school teachers is. And then, you kind of put the number that we've trained, we'll say 19 or 20,000 over the denominator, over hundreds of thousands, and suddenly you're at like small percentages. So we need to not declare victory because we have a program authorized. We have to double down and triple down on the amount of investment into these programs. And it can be, across multiple organizations providing. I don't really care as long as they're to a quality and a standard that the government has set and funding them. But we absolutely positively have to be educating more high school and middle school teachers on cyber hygiene so that students graduate with cyber hygiene, cyber opportunity, so that students know that cyber is a great future job potentially, and then kind of cyber excellence, like trying to figure out who are those kids that need to be at summer camps.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So they can really, really take off, and getting those kind of levels, those gradients of value in our high school teachers. They want to be at the teachers, the STEM teachers, but you have to provide the curriculum product to them. And right now the numerator is not near enough given the size of the denominator. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry to jump back in.
No, Mark. I mean, it's a great perspective, and it's a great point. And so, kind of what I want to start doing, I want to toss one more question to Daniel, and then, as we've been talking about the federal government space, and then I kind of want to drive down to the state side of the house to see kind of from a policy standpoint. But in that transitional question for Daniel, the federal government's role in K-12 education is somewhat limited, given that policy is determined at Kirsten's level, at the state and local level. But there are things that the federal government can do to lower those barriers. Can you kind of talk about some of those opportunities and some of those ideas that are getting conversed around Capitol Hill?
Sure, and that's absolutely right, which I think is why it's so important to trust in the ability of school districts and schools, because you can't have a cookie cutter approach, right? Every district and every school is going to have different needs. And so what we know works is supporting school districts in states by giving them resources directly. Oftentimes they might not know about resources or guidance that's out there. They might want it, but not have access to it. And so you want to sort of develop that bridge in order to reach schools directly. Do things like professional development sessions for educators, or helping develop cybersecurity focused curricula and being able to reach schools directly with that. And I think COVID has really demonstrated the extent to which educators and students desperately need these resources. And from a cybersecurity threat perspective, that problem has just become amplified. And so, that's sort of how we've approached thinking through this issue. Earlier this year, the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, which Senator Rosen serves on, held a hearing to explore the Cyberspace Solarium Commission recommendations, one of which, as Mark mentioned, was to expand the Cybersecurity Education and Training Assistance Program, or CTAP, which many of you know provides cybersecurity workforce development assistance, and has now been in existence for 7 years, impacted millions of students. And of course, cyber.org has been at the forefront of those efforts as the implementing organization. And so building on that recommendation, earlier this year, Senator Rosen teamed up with Senator Cassidy of Louisiana and Congressman Richmond and Abraham, also of Louisiana, and to introduce the Bipartisan and Bicameral Protect Act, which the senator mentioned in her remarks. And what that bill does is it formally authorizes and provides stability to CTAP. And as it was previously noted, that was incorporated into the Senate Defense Authorization Bill. We're working to make sure that it remains and will be included in the final defense bill, which we're expecting movement on hopefully in the next few weeks, although the process is particularly volatile this year. But we're optimistic that it will remain in the final bill. We'll work to ensure that it does. And another bill that I wanted to mention that Senator Rosen has introduced since ROTC and JROTC came up earlier is the Promotes Act. And so that's legislation, similar model in that it creates a grant program for JROTC participating schools in order to reach students with STEM education resources, and specifically and explicitly mention cybersecurity. And so that the goal is to expand the technical workforce and ensure that future generations have the skills necessary to protect our nation. And so we approach this issue always in a bipartisan way, and always and we try to make it a bicameral initiative as well whenever we introduce cyber workforce related legislation. And the second bill I mentioned, the Promotes Act, was included in the House Defense Bill. Same thing, we're working to make sure it stays in the final NDAA. But I think that the successful model here is to be able to reach schools with direct assistance and to introduce legislation in a bipartisan and bicameral way.
Definitely, I mean, and that to me, I think is paving the way, removing those barriers and allowing folks like, teachers, school districts, and all the way up to state departments of education to pave that way. So Kirsten, I kind of want to dive into the state, efforts, from the state policy standpoint. And let me tell you, North Dakota is an absolute leader in K-12 cybersecurity education. There's no question about that. And can you tell us, how and why this has evolved into a priority for you and your schools?
I sure can. And thanks so much for having me. And I've just been agreeing with so much that everyone has been saying. Laura, Daniel, Mark, couldn't agree with all of those approaches on how important this is. And, grateful to the senator to supporting this, and just how important it is to have people that are in it for the long haul. And really, it can't just be one and done. This is the long game. And maybe that's where I'll start with North Dakota. North Dakota, because of our rural nature, because of our small, size and small populations, we have to partner together. And it's just been part of our history and culture for so long. I mean, even when our ancestors came and homesteaded North Dakota, we like to say we had this huge independent spirit, and we're going to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and get it done all on our own. But in actuality, when you look at North Dakota and you look at who we are as a state and the culture of our state, we have a long-standing cultural history of making sure that we work together. And so as we started to attack this problem and really address this issue that your previous speakers have just done a great job of laying out what the issues are, we were well positioned because of our history and the culture of working together to partner to tackle this together. And that's really the root of why I think we've been able to get where we've gotten. Decades ago, we had to build an infrastructure of electricity, and then there was telecommunications. We just had to band together. And when it came time to build the infrastructure of technology and network capability and broadband, we carried that culture over, and we've been working the Dakota Carrier Network, AT&T, our federal, the FCC regulations, all the opportunities for grants. We partnered with, we being the state, partnered with all of those private industry and those others that were willing to help us get the connectivity that we needed and have the infrastructure in place. So we took advantage of those FCC grants, and we have been able to establish high-speed connectivity across the state, which has been incredibly helpful for us with this pandemic. What we have now, what we've been able to just discover and learn is that over 99% of our students' homes, our K-12 students' homes, are connected with high-speed connectivity. And so, that coupled with our current governor's history and support of technology, and the Department of Public Instruction's partnership with EduTech and Code.org and Cyber.org, and all of those things have really allowed us to leverage that relationship and leverage that partnership. But getting a little bit more specifically to your question of how did we begin this journey of understanding how important it was? We listened to our constituents. Kevin, you've heard me describe North Dakota as North Dakota as a state can be described as one community with a really long Main Street that meanders all over the state. And because of that, you're not able to ignore your constituents, and you're not able to ignore the business and the industry that are demanding these types of employees, that are demanding these types of occupations. But for me, particularly, my constituents, my number one constituent are my students and their families. And when I heard repeatedly over and over and over again from employers and families that said, we understand how important computer science, how important coding is, and really how important cybersecurity is becoming in every one of our industries. Whether it's agriculture, you have technology and thus cybersecurity. You can't, you don't call and make a reservation at a restaurant anymore. You use some sort of app to make your reservation. The cybersecurity that is there. So whether you're talking healthcare or banking or insurance or agriculture or energy, which is huge in North Dakota as well, the list goes on and on. Every parent out there understood and realized that regardless of what their child was going to go into, they needed to have the foundations of computational thinking, of the understanding of what occupations were out there and how important it was to keep those systems safe. Every individual citizen out there understood how important cybersecurity was to them when they went to the hospital, when they went to the bank, when they made that reservation on Open Table. And so when you're as closely knit as North Dakota is, you can't ignore that. And so 2017, so the three pillars of DPI in North Dakota are build relationships, cultivate opportunity, and inspire growth. So number one, and those come in that order. If you're going to be successful in everything, those come in that order. You have to build relationships first. So understanding that we're a small state agency that only has a small sector of K through 12, 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds, we needed to build partnerships and build that collaborative effort. And so that's where we brought in the Greater North Dakota Chamber, which is our state chamber of those business and industry people that were calling for this. We had to identify who those champions in our legislature were going to be in order to make sure that this was the long game. And so we've done that. So 2017, we brought those people together. We had this conversation. They were all, putting our shoulder into the flywheel, if you will. And we identified a three-prong approach that this needs to happen. And the three-prong approach is, number one, we need to ensure that we have a set of standards that includes this, and not just loosely knit self-district develop, but what role can the state justifiably play? Daniel, you talked about the role of the federal government. Well, there's limitations as well of what the role the state government can play as well, but we can set the table for success in our school districts. A lot of that has to be locally driven in our school districts, but the state does have a responsibility of providing the resources, the funding, and the parameters for success. So we call, standards are that tight on what we expect, we allow our school districts loose to get there and have to supply the funding and resources. And so number one was to create a set of standards that regardless of zip code, regardless of school district that they went to, that there would be a certain set of expectations that every student should learn kindergarten through 12. Number two was to ensure that we had the funding and the mechanisms, the vehicles in place to get those teachers that Mark was talking about. We need to have teachers in our schools that are credentialed along with their teaching licenses to be able to teach our students in K through 12. And then finally, we needed to have the expectation from our state legislature that this be part of every one of our school districts. Curriculum and offerings to our students. And so we identified that there were, several things that we could do as a state agency that didn't require legislation or funding. And that was to create our standards and to create the opportunity. So what we require legislation is the authority for the state Department of Education, DPI in North Dakota, to provide credentials to our teachers that were already licensed. And so we set about going and created, I think, what is the first ever state to create kindergarten through 12th grade computer and cybersecurity standards. And so each and every one of our, whether they're a kindergarten teacher, first grade teacher, 8th grade teacher, or a high school cybersecurity teacher, have standards of what students should know and be able to do in the area to scaffold, as we do in education, kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to editorialize and get on my soapbox.
Yeah.
And I hear often, and even in today's conversation, there's lots of conversation about what we need to do in high school, and we're starting to dip into middle school conversation right now. And every time I talk to parents and every time I talk to business or industry, whether it be, construction industry or, the local painters union, and they say, how can we get more people, how can we get more students, kids involved and know what a great opportunity this is as a career? And they start to talk to me about high school incentives, and they start to talk to me maybe a little bit about talking to 8th graders. And I just have to say, wow, is that way too late? Wow, is that way too late? We have, if you really want to get students excited and encouraged and interested in whatever your area of specialty or passion is, or whoever, your industry is, you better start thinking about getting to them in 3rd grade. And I would even say maybe the end of 2nd grade. But by the end of 2nd grade, definitely by 3rd grade, our young people are identifying what they like, what they're good at, what interests them, and what their passion and what they see themselves being in the future. And so career fairs are getting high school students, exposed to, if you haven't laid the groundwork in kindergarten through 3rd grade about teaching those foundational skills of thinking about cybersecurity, about thinking about computational thinking that is necessary, and even exposing them to what coding is, you are then have set yourself so far back, because all of those other industries have kind of done that in one way or another. And so that's why it was critically important to me that we didn't talk about standards at a high school level or a middle school year level. We have cybersecurity, computer science standards beginning in kindergarten, and we are integrating that. And that is why our efforts for the teachers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I suppose, later, but we needed to have the credentialing, not of how do we get high school teachers credentialed to teach cybersecurity, but we're working again with cyber.org and code.org to get our 2nd grade teacher credentialed. And our goal is to have at least one credentialed computer science cybersecurity teacher for every 100 students in our buildings. So that's our goal, that's our effort. We were able to accomplish a few of those things in the 2019 session, but we're coming right back at it in the 21 session. We have a biennial legislative cycle in North Dakota, so we didn't have a session in 2020. We will have one in 2021. So we're gearing up. We've formed the K-12, PK20W Alliance that brings together business, industry, kindergarten teachers, along with postgraduate teachers at our universities to do this work. So that's kind of where we're at in North Dakota.
Yeah, Kirsten, I mean, and that to me has been a model, a shining point for the country to see how is it that a policy standpoint can actually go into, you know, implementation? And you say you've been doing this for 3 years. I want to know, if have you been able to see any significant or observe any significant changes since you've implemented that? Have you noticed, you know, any patterns?
Oh, absolutely. So let's just talk about that. So in the 17-18 school year, there was 23% of our high schools taught a foundational course in computer science or cybersecurity. Right now, 44% of our high schools have. So that's not 100%. We are aiming towards 100%. And in 2019, this last year, 19% of our AP CS exam takers were female. That was more than double in the previous year. And so we talked about, you know, we have strategic alliances with Palo Alto Networks, the Girl Scouts of the USA. The National Girl Scout leader was scheduled to come to North Dakota in April to do some publicity and launch with us. Obviously, for COVID, because of COVID, that needed to be delayed, but we're still working on it. So 2 years ago, we didn't even have a credential in North Dakota to.
Uh-oh. We may have lost her. She said she was having questionable audio. Well, we'll give it a second. Well, they're talking in my ear saying, oh, there we go. Kirsten, you're back. We lost you for a minute.
Did you? Okay. So we have over 5,000 of our 11,000 educators that have received some sort of awareness, and dozens and dozens of computer science, cybersecurity awareness. We're bringing those educators to Bismarck State College's campus this June for 5 days of training. And that's our hope, to get over 5,000, half of our educators credentialed during that 5-day time. So again, so we've seen tremendous amounts of movement in this short 2-year period of time.
Well, it's fantastic work that you all are doing. And it's interesting to bring all of these parties together to see how, from a federal senator all the way down to the educator, how this policy can be, can be expanded upon, that can be utilized, that can be fostered among students. And what Kirsten is doing, to me, is the true strategy for every student cyber literate. And I think that the replication of that model among states across the country will foster that workforce awareness. We recently did a study with EdWeek Research Center, and it showed that there are cybersecurity deserts all across the country. And we have to come up with a model to ensure that we're not just focusing on the high population centers of our country. And in Kirsten's example, we're not just focusing on the Bismarcks or the Fargos, but we're also going into the Minots. We're going into those smaller rural communities. We're going into the tribal communities, and ensuring that there are replicable solutions for those educators to begin implementing into their classroom. Let's say if they don't have the financial resources to begin teaching this content, what can we do to give them to begin introducing these concepts? And so these cybersecurity deserts, we have to create oasis across the country, and that's where support from the federal government. It can't just be the federal government. Support from the state government. It can't just be the state government. It's got to be a synergy between federal, state, and local individuals, local education agencies, and to the very fact that we're bringing industry, government, nonprofits, we're bringing them all, higher education, we're bringing them all to the table to solve this. And I think Mark said it best, early on, is how are we all running in the same lane, swimming in that same direction? And I see that behind Mark on his door is "Finish the fight." And I don't know what that's in reference to, but I think that's very appropriate in this. The fight has just begun. the job has just begun. And, just from a cyber.org standpoint, I can stand up and proudly say we've done, impacted 3 million students. But when you look at the country and there's over 50 million students in our country, our job has just begun. And that's where these partnerships, these ideas need to go. So I would be remiss, pause. I would be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out to this being Cybersecurity Career Awareness Week. I think this is a perfect timing to have this conversation as we focus on that closing the gap in that cybersecurity workforce of our country. So there are plenty of resources. Go check out Twitter. Go search, do a Google search of National Cybersecurity Career Awareness Week. There's plenty of great resources out there. But as we close up, I am looking to my folks in the room. We got any questions from anybody that we need to address? All right. Well, Kirsten, Daniel, Laura, Mark, thank you for contributing to this incredible conversation. This is being posted on social media and broadcasted out. We're going to share this to the world, and we hope that this begins the conversation at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and even in the classroom level about how we can together begin solving this workforce crisis, this workforce gap, this national security issue that we face in our country as it relates to cybersecurity. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to the audience who've been listening in on this, and let's together join the fight and let's accomplish this together and do this jointly. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your National Cybersecurity Career Awareness Week.